Good afternoon, everyone. How you doing? Sorry, on my phone instead of my computer, I seem to be having some technical difficulties, but I'm happy to be with you. Welcome to today's Bay Street Lunch and Learn. Refill your global bucket list with Robin Esrock. If you don't know me, my name's Craig Walters, and along with Leanne Matlow, I am one of the co-chairs of this year's annual campaign. Before we get in today's program, I wanted to quickly talk about what's been going on at UJA this year. I don't know about you, but it's finally beginning to feel like we're almost at the light at the end of the tunnel. The negative impact of the pandemic on our day-to-day lives is nearly over. And with the world beginning to open again, we're all eager for things to get back to normal. But what I've seen in my role as co-chair is that there are still many members of our community who are still struggling. In some cases, our community is experiencing more hardship than ever. When it comes to food insecurity, mental health issues, and access to social services, our community is continuing to experience the fallout from the pandemic in profound ways. Here are just a few stats that I'm going to share with you. 26,000 Jewish families are still experiencing food insecurity, and 6,000 community members are considered to be extremely food insecure. At times going days without anything to eat. Children's Healthcare Canada reported that the number of children admitted to hospital because of suicide attempts has doubled during the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2019, UJA Social Services Agency saw 2,500 clients with mental health concerns. In 2021, we anticipate over 4,000 clients, nearly a doubling. The road to recovery is long and complex and multifaceted, particularly for our community's most vulnerable. I consider myself to be very fortunate, as the impact on me and my family has been more of an inconvenience as compared to many others in our community who have lost their jobs and are still struggling. We ask that as you think about the brighter times ahead and perhaps make travel plans for the holidays, you think of those in Toronto who are still living in poverty, struggling to put food on the table and struggling to access the mental health resources that they desperately need. All of the work we've done so far would have not been possible without the support of our dedicated and incredible donors, and our community still needs us. Let's rally for recovery together and move our entire community into a secure, sustainable future in this post-pandemic world. For more information about our current annual campaign and information on donating, please visit www.rallyforrecovery.ca. And now I'd like to introduce Darren Gottlieb, the chair of today's event. Over to you now, Darren.
Thank you, Craig. For those who don't know who I am, as Craig mentioned, my name is Darren Gottlieb. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Bay Street Division and chair of this event. It is my pleasure to introduce Robin Esrock, an internationally renowned travel journalist, broadcaster, and author of Canada's #1 selling travel book, The Great Canadian Bucket List, as well as the international bestsellers, The Great Global Bucket List and The Great Australian Bucket List. He is also the creator and co-host of the 40-part TV series World Travels, seen on Travel Channel, National Geographic, and Amazon Prime in 21 languages worldwide. Having visited over 110 countries on all 7 continents, Robin has been profiled by 60 Minutes, MSNBC, CBC, Global, and the Wall Street Journal, ABC, and many others. He has spoken about his journey and insights at dozens of conferences around the world, and his TEDx talk has over 1 million views. He is currently writing a national column for Canadian Geographic called Bucket Listed. Robin invites us to dream big and chase our wildest dreams, and we're thrilled to have him with us today. Over to you, Robin.
Thanks, Darren. All right, let's go on a journey. That's it. You've met me. We're done now. Nice to meet everybody. I know you're out there. I can't see you, but thank you so much for having me today. I want to thank the UGA and the Bay Street Club, who recognize it's time for us to start dreaming big again. I know you probably spend way too much time looking at a screen, so I appreciate that you've carved out some of that time to spend it with us this afternoon. Now, when I tell most people what I do, I'm usually asked the same bunch of questions. How does someone get a job literally ticking off their bucket list? What are my favorite countries and destinations? And with all the stuff that I get up to, isn't it dangerous? Isn't it a little risky? And today I'm going to answer these questions because they're all connected. And, that's what we need now more than ever, a connection to the stories we're not hearing, the places we're not visiting, the people we're not meeting, at least for some time yet. So let's start with that first question. How does someone build a career that specializes in investigating the world's best experiences? Well, every personal journey has many complicated twists, and mine starts with a very modest teaching about achieving happiness. It comes down to 5 simple acts, and here's the first 3. Find something to do, someone to love, and something to look forward to. Now, about 15 years ago, before my bucket list career took off, I was lacking all 3. I was working for a large music agency in Vancouver, watching digital downloading decimate the music industry, along with my passion for music that drew me to that industry in the first place. It would take years before Steve Jobs kind of figured that part out. And in the meantime, my job was low paying and soul crushing and hollow. Meanwhile, the long-term relationship that I was in kind of ran its natural course. I had nothing to do, nobody to love, and nothing to look forward to. And so like a lot of people, I thought I can distract my way out of this hole. I bought myself a 49C scooter.
Fine now, drones, of course.
I bought myself a 49C scooter, 49cc scooter for the summer, something I could, mean machine. I wanted to live free. I wanted to ride hard. And every day I'd ride up this intersection in downtown Vancouver, and cars coming down the side street would brake just a beat too late. My instinct always told me it was a sketchy intersection, but it was a beautiful sunny day, and I gave my 49cc's for all it was worth. And this was the morning that an unlicensed driver didn't see the stop sign and drove straight through. I smashed into the car, swan dived over my handlebars, and when I came to, there was a paramedic putting an oxygen mask around my face. The accident destroyed the bike, but I was lucky enough to hobble away with just a broken kneecap. And what a lucky break it was. I mean, for one thing, I could have been killed. And for another, about 6 months later, I received a $20,000 insurance settlement. Wasn't 2 million, wasn't 200,000, but life-changing money doesn't have to have nearly as many zeros as you'd think. My friends and family advised me to, save the money, buy a car, get into Vancouver's real estate market, in retrospect, would have been a brilliant idea. But that slight brush with mortality was a strong reminder to stop putting my biggest dreams on hold. COVID has had a similar effect on all of us. There we are thinking we have all the time in the world, and along comes an unlicensed driver or a microscopic virus. The pandemic is a tragic reminder just how quickly our plans and goals and dreams can crash before we get to them. I'd always loved travel. I was always drawn to this idea of a big global adventure. So I decided to invest every cent of that painfully earned settlement in a solo 12-month round-the-world journey to visit the countries I'd always wanted to visit. And it was a bold move. Everyone thought I was crazy, and I was nervous. I mean, so much could go wrong. Everything I'd read in the news made me think that the moment I get off a plane, these guys would be waiting for me, and they would have, dengue and Zika and Ebola. And that today they would have the Delta variant for sure. I studied for journalism in the early 1990s, which is kind of like having a degree in typewriter maintenance. But we did learn that media, and now social media, thrives on the principle that if it bleeds, it leads. The more fear a story generates, the more attention it gets. See, it's not just your mother-in-law. We're all hardwired with genes that are twitching for imminent threats because early humans who casually dismissed a threat as probably nothing were eventually eaten by saber-toothed cats. And over the millennia, Jews have always had a very good reason to be overcautious, which likely evolved into our famous neurosis. Now, knowing what's going on out there is critical for success in the information age, but we can be paralyzed by just knowing too much. And when bad news dominates the way it does, it paints the perspective that things are much worse than they actually are. You know, in the news section, it's political chaos and violence in the Middle East. And then in the travel section, it's Tel Aviv's amazing nightlife. I was terrified like everyone else until I committed to investing in positive stories and images, the kind of stuff you see in travel shows or read in those wafer-thin travel sections or perhaps find on a bookshelf. And inspired by this good news, I jumped into my adventure determined to record everything that happened during one amazing year of traveling around the world. Unaware that I was pioneering what would be one of the first branded travel blogs. Now, my first bucket list pit stop was Peru, and I'm going to leave my personal story here for our first bucket list pit stop. When we think of the Amazon jungle, we usually think of Brazil, but the rainforest spans half a dozen countries in South America, including 60% of Peru, the hot and sticky part. Now, look, I enjoy overcrowded, rickety old back-breaking hammock riverboats as much as the next explorer, but my wife wanted to join me on this trip. And as every husband knows, a happy wife is a happy life. So I set out to find an incredible bucket list Amazon jungle adventure that would suck the bite out of the mosquito and leave my lower back intact. So let me introduce you to the Aria Amazon. Okay, it's got 16 air-conditioned rooms with ensuite bathrooms, king-size beds, a spa, a lounge, a cocktail bar, hot tubs, world-class chefs. I mean, this Aria Amazon is the floating river palace of your jungle dreams. It departs from Iquitos, a former colonial rubber town, and you sail up various tributaries into the Amazon in search of all the amazing wildlife. Now, you know, that jungle is hot, it's sticky, it's buggy, and it's always amazing to get back to that boat where they give you your favorite cocktail. I didn't want to venture too far from that boat. And a decade before, when I flew into Lima, as a newbie backpacker, I didn't want to venture too far from the airport. I was so nervous to just get out of there, much less hop on a rickshaw. You know, traveling alone with no itinerary, it became immediately obvious that my safety and my well-being would have to rely heavily on my instinct. But fortunately, mine happens to be very well tuned. I'm sure you immediately picked up the accent. I was born and raised in Johannesburg, South Africa, where we spoke about personal safety the way Canadians talk about the weather. When I left Joburg in the mid-1990s, it was one of the most violent cities in the world. I mean, the crime was just stratospheric. And without any formal training, Johannesburgers learned how to look around and hone a kind of spider sense for threats and danger. You know, it's we all have this common sense. We have that voice inside our heads that tells us repeatedly when something isn't quite right. You know, how many times does something bad happen? And the first thing we do is blame ourselves. You know, I knew I shouldn't have signed that deal or made that investment or parked in that dark alley or eaten the pink chicken. Never eat the pink chicken, no matter what you think. We hear this voice inside our head, but we don't always listen to it. We really pay it the attention it deserves. And I find myself in some pretty sticky situations over the years, absolutely. But I've learned to let that voice guide me forward. And as my solo journey progressed from South America to Europe, Asia, Africa, that voice only got stronger and more reliable. If the food looked dodgy, if the taxi driver was acting weird, if the snake looked a little hungry, I backed away, no matter how inconvenient or eccentric it made me look. Now, trusting our instinct is great, but let's be clear, it won't tell you how to open a parachute. You know, instinct alone can't always guide us where to go, what to do, and who to trust. But there is a simple fix. All we have to do is ask. But for some reason, we've been imprinted with this idea that asking for help is a sign of weakness. You know, even in school, kids are afraid to put up their hand and ask a question because what will people think if they ask a stupid question? And that's carried over to conferences and meetings and virtual calls. You know, But there are no stupid questions. I mean, assuming we know what's going on when we don't is when things become exponentially more risky. It's been the direct cause of planes crashing and ships sinking and projects tanking and bucket list writers meeting their doom with an inevitable ironic headline. As soon as I started working with bucket lists, I thought this is just the kind of stupid headline that you would read in social media. But here's the best part. You'll be amazed at how those around us and above us respond positively for requests for help. Check out this great clip.
I've actually always found something to be very true, which is most people don't get those experiences because they never ask. I've never found anybody that didn't want to help me if I asked them for help. I always call them up. I called up, this will date me, but I called up Bill Hewlett when I was 12 years old. And he lived in Palo Alto. His number was still in the phone book. And he answered the phone himself. He said, yes? He said, hi, I'm Steve Jobs. I'm 12 years old. I'm a student in high school, and I want to build a frequency counter. And I was wondering if you had any spare parts I could have. And he laughed, and he gave me the spare parts to build this frequency counter, and he gave me a job that summer in Hewlett-Packard, working on the assembly line, putting nuts and bolts together on frequency counters. He got me a job in the place that built them. And I was in heaven. And I've never found anyone who said no or hung up the phone when I called. I just asked. And when people ask me, I try to be as responsive, to pay that debt of gratitude back. Most people never pick up the phone and call. Most people never ask. And that's what separates sometimes the people that do things from the people that just dream about them.
I think it would have been very difficult to say no to Steve Jobs, but I think he demonstrates that asking questions signifies confidence. And if you're respectful of people's time and experience, you'll be surprised at the positive response that you receive, because it feels good to help other people, to mentor, to succeed as a team. Asking questions increases communication, efficiency, success, and definitely your chance of finding the best deep-fried guinea pig in the mountain taverns of Ecuador. Please appreciate this deep-fried rodent, along with what I believe is the perfect Zoom segue, complete with a zebra crossing. When it comes to exotic food, everything kind of tastes like chicken, I got to tell you, but some things don't. The deep-fried guinea pig was elasticy and stringy. Look, if there's a fourth question I often get asked, it's what's the best food in the planet? Where's the best food? And look, like everything else, when it comes to choosing one's best, whether it's films or books or definitely food, it really comes down to a matter of taste. My own favorite cuisines lean towards Southeast Asia, India, Turkey, Italy. Everything tastes better in Italy, to each their own. But less debatable, I think, is a roundup of the worst things I've put in my mouth. And my apologies in advance if you're eating lunch, because it might get a little distasteful. We're going to start with deep-fried hairy spiders, which is a popular roadside snack in Cambodia. You pick off the legs, you eat them like French fries, and then you bite into the bulbous butt and let the bug juice run down your chin. Duck is delicious. Eggs are delicious. So why not kill two birds with one stone? Balut is a popular delicacy in the Philippines. It's a fertilized duck egg. So you peel the shell and then you bite into the crunchy, feathery goodness. My most exotic culinary adventure was actually at the Explorers Club annual dinner. I was emceeing this illustrious black tie event, which is famous for its ambassadors and its astronauts, and also its rather unusual buffet. Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Richard Branson, they're all members of this legendary travel club in New York, which is known for sponsoring expeditions around the world. The Explorers Club is it's quite unusual. I mean, they had grilled snake, goat penis on a stick. My favorite was actually the iguana balls, and by balls I refer to the shape of the dish, unfortunately, not the anatomy. Look, I've tried snakes and crickets, raw beluga whale, various types of insects, but the most disgusting thing in the world is right here in Canada, and let no one tell you otherwise. And I'm talking about the legendary sour toe cocktail in Dawson City, Yukon. The drink served with a severed human toe. You pay $5 for a tumbler of whiskey. They drop in a human toe. The toe has to touch your lips, and then you've joined the sour toe cocktail club. 60,000 people have done this. The nail's still on. It's pretty gnarly, a bit toe jammy on the high notes, but you can hear I always trip over my words. So I found it kind of refreshing to finally put somebody else's foot in my mouth. Look, finding answers today to just about anything is easier than at any other time in history. I mean, we're in this golden age for curiosity. And while sometimes fortune favors the bold, it will always favor the curious. My uncanny ability to pursue wild adventures and spot trends and stay safe on the road really comes down to curiosity. I love learning about the histories of everyday things, how stuff works. What do those numbers and acronyms mean? How were they calculated? Today we've got podcasts and audiobooks and YouTube channels and blogs and Twitter feeds and Substacks and streaming documentaries. I mean, there's this flood of content out there that's amazing. We just have to learn to curate what's important and what's harmful and what's helpful, what can send us spiraling down a rabbit hole. We've been overwhelmed with terminology during the pandemic, and media literacy is a skill that's just rarely spoken about. I mean, I think that I should teach kids from a very young age media literacy. All these crazy conspiracy theories just speak to the fact that so many people haven't done their homework, which includes checking the reliability of where you get your information from. Because I swear to you, a friend of my brother's barista told me that 93.4% of statistics are made up on the spot. Now, asking questions has served me well when it comes time to assess the risks of sandboarding an active volcano in Nicaragua, or spelunking in New Zealand, or cage diving with great white sharks in South Africa. I mean, you do the research and you very quickly realize that with the most basic precautions, there's not nearly as much risk as you'd think. For example, you have way, way, way more chance of getting killed by a flying champagne cork than by a shark. We receive so much value when we take a good, grounded look at the world, the industries we work in, trends in the market, technology, culture, politics, climate, history. It's all connected, and great ideas can emerge from anywhere. I had this idea that post-disaster tourism would be a thing. I still do. And that's what led me to Chernobyl, site of the world's worst nuclear disaster. And you don't feel radiation pickling your DNA when you stand outside reactor number 4. It just felt like another sunny day. At one point, my Geiger counter ticked over 100 times higher than it should be. And wouldn't you know it, a butterfly landed right on top of it. And I shoot it away because it probably had razor sharp fangs. Chernobyl is serviced by this model Soviet town called Pripyat. And it was home to 50,000 people, all of whom had to be evacuated on one horrible day in April 1986. And everything there just has to sit and rot. It's radioactive toxic waste. And exploring this post-apocalyptic urban nightmare sends shivers up your spine. The blackened dolls in the nursery, the creaking old Ferris wheel, the pianos that just twang and make all these spooky sounds. It's really, really creepy. Is it safe? It is. Just don't touch anything. Now, Chernobyl's understandably not on everybody's bucket list, but our next destination should be at the very top. And to be honest, it's difficult for me to describe the experience of cruising around the Antarctic Peninsula, even for a travel writer. To get there, I had to fly to Buenos Aires. Then you fly down to Ushuaia, the southern tip of Argentina, and you board an expedition ship for usually a 12-day sailing of the Antarctic Peninsula. There's no avoiding the Drake Shake. This is a 2-day crossing of the world's roughest, wildest, windiest seas. The boat just rocks and rolls. You could be lucky and get the Drake Lake when it's flat. But for 2 days, it's pretty rough. Half the passengers were laid low with seasickness, myself included. But when you wake up on the 3rd day, well, just take a look at this. Are you seeing this? of course, it doesn't get dark in summer, and there's just tens of thousands of penguins everywhere, whales, seals, icebergs. You take multiple excursions every day to explore the peninsula. You can even camp for one night and sleep on the ice on the seventh continent under the midnight sun. I mean, how much more bucket list can you get? The isolation is unnerving, but even our Spartan ship felt impossibly decadent. It did have a hot tub and a sauna and the best Scotch bar in the Antarctic. And unlike polar explorers in the past, I didn't have to think too hard about whose toe I was going to have to drop into my drink. Although when it comes to travel, we may soon need to take, no risks, at all. I mean, things are changing. Why visit Antarctica or Machu Picchu when you can stream it right into your VR headset? Like so many other industries, COVID is accelerating the future of travel. We're getting closer to this world where we'll be able to patch in to go anywhere and become anyone we want to be. This is the move that Facebook is making to get into this metaverse, this digital realm to replace the living one. But we're not there yet, and that's great. I mean, the real world will always be exactly that. Real, surprising, spontaneous. The most memorable moments often happen when we least expect them. The restaurants we stumble upon, the oddball encounters we have with oddball people who often impart valuable lessons about their culture, and they bust down the stereotypes and they teach us ancient wisdom like never, don't even think about wearing a mankini. A more valuable insight literally jumped out at me in Papua New Guinea. Now, it's the wildest place I've ever been, Papua New Guinea. It's got 800 living languages spread across 700 tribes, many living just how they've lived for millennia. And I was in the country on a diving expedition, and one afternoon I joined my guide for an impromptu outrigger paddle to visit one of the nearby islands. And we arrived at the small village, and we greeted by these guys. I mean, they weren't expecting tourists. This is just the way they live out there. And my instinct said, maybe I should stick close to my guide. But there hasn't been a case of cannibalism in this part of the world for a couple of days. This is the actual headline of the newspaper when I arrived a few days before. Possessed man eats baby, right above mob lynches crocodile and below the murder of Nicolas Cage's career. Anyway, I start exploring a bit, and I follow this jungle track, having one of those, like, how the hell did I end up here moments? And suddenly I hear this rustle in the forest, and out emerges a half-naked painted tribesman pointing a spear at my neck. And he seemed genuinely alarmed to have stumbled across me. His eyes were angry and scared, and I was pretty much convinced I was not being invited back to his hut for tea. So I knew exactly what I needed to do. Evacuate my bowels. But before I could do that, I took a breath and I forced out a big smile. And I said the first thing that came into my mind, which was, buddy, can't we all just get along? And it was the smile that did it. The smile that cut through the tension, that de-escalated a potentially Sharpie stick situation. It shows the power of just taking a brief pause before reacting, because reacting badly to a situation often causes the most problems. If you take a first aid course, they drill it into your head. Remain calm. Calmness leads to better decision-making. And that's true whether you're investing or launching a new product or building a business or getting lost in Papua New Guinea. When the tribesman saw me smile, he did the strangest thing. He put down his spear and he smiled too. And I had a camera around my neck, so I just picked it up. And without looking through the viewfinder, I snapped a picture. And this is the actual photo from that actual moment. And it's one of my favorite photos because we're just looking at each other from two completely different worlds. With a sort of serenity almost. And I showed him the picture, and you know what? He loved it. And you know what he did? He invited me back to his hut for tea. He was like, come. And he took me back to his hut for tea. And there I met his 4 daughters. And as you can see, I'm still beaming, but understandably, they're not entirely convinced. Now, our next bucket list pit stop is also pretty wild. A lot of us travel for unique wildlife, especially with ecosystems so under threat. Mountain gorillas in Central Africa, Komodo dragons in Indonesia, the big 5, lion, leopard, elephant, rhino and buffalo. The big five is a hunting designation. That's what hunters wanted to bag, but it's perfectly fine to aim and shoot with your camera. And of course, you'll see the big five and so much more during the annual migration of the wildebeest, the largest movement of animals on Earth, in the Serengeti or Masai Mara National Park. You can do this on all sorts of budgets, but what could be better than viewing the Great Migration from a luxury tent? This company is called And Beyond. They're fantastic. They got lodges all over Africa. Even better, get into the infinity pool and they'll hand you your favorite cocktail and you're just looking at just incredible amounts of animals. And then you get to the Galapagos, which was one of the last destinations that I ticked off for my book, The Great Global Bucket List. And I was skeptical. I'd heard so much about it. I mean, how could it possibly live up to the hype? It took forever to get there. You fly to Quito and then you fly across. There's a lot of paperwork. I transferred to this fantastic boat. I'd spend a week cruising around the archipelago. And I woke up and I was jet lagged and tired and crusty eyed. And the captain said, grab a snorkel, jump right in, just refresh it and dive into the sea. And I jump into the sea and instantly I see marine iguanas and sea lions and sea turtles and penguins all at the same time through the same frame. To see one of these animals when you're snorkeling is amazing. To see them all, honestly, I thought I was hallucinating. So don't worry, the Galapagos easily lives up to its reputation. Closer to home, every year, 900 bears migrate from their summer dens on the Hudson Bay outside of Churchill, Manitoba. And it's a polar bear bonanza. You can stay on a Tundra Buggy lodge, this like hotel on the permafrost, or just go take a day trip, and the bears surround you. They fog up your camera lens with their breath. I mean, it's amazing. Nobody steps foot on the ground though, because these are hungry bears and they just want to shred you apart and eat you. Now, polar bears are marine mammals. They live and they thrive on sea ice. The Arctic is melting at a rate you just have to see it to believe it. When I crossed the Northwest Passage a couple of years ago to follow the footsteps of the Franklin expedition, the Arctic communities and the sailors I met told me they'd never seen anything like it. Instead of thick sea ice, it's a lake in the Arctic. And the impact for global climate and Arctic wildlife and international trade are going to be massive. I think about impact quite a lot in terms of culture and history and trams and cars and buses as well, especially when I found myself racing in a late night underground bike race in Hong Kong. I was doing a story about the courier subculture. Those folks who ride around the city delivering your packages. Well, in Hong Kong, they have their own language, their own dress code, and they prefer bicycles that don't have brakes. It's called fixed gear biking. The logic is no one's going to steal their bike if it's got no brakes. But it's also doesn't kind of put life expectancy high up on their list of priorities. Anyway, I joined them for a race and I learned an interesting principle that they go by that I've adopted myself moving forward. When you're riding a bicycle without no brakes, if an obstacle presents itself, you can turn left or you can turn right, but you can't stop. And nobody crashes so long as you always keep moving. Nobody gets stuck. No one just hits a wall. I've personally hit a wall many times in my travel career. Visas denied at the last minute, weather blowing once in a lifetime opportunities, an actual wall in Sri Lanka. It's also too easy for all of us to hit a wall in our careers, in our relationships, in our projects, to get stuck and defeated and unable or unwilling to see the light at the end of the tunnel, or muster up the energy to even try. But that courier philosophy ensures that problems keep moving forward towards a solution, no matter what the situation is. Keeping momentum is not always easy, but it's essential. And when you find yourself in a tough spot, you just make a small decision and you let it carry you forward one turn at a time. Standing at the foot of another career wall, I came back after I did my trip. I was like, what am I going to do? It was a small decision that took me into the world of bucket lists. Now, this bucket list phenomenon has only been around since 2007 when this movie came out with Jack Nicholson and Morgan Freeman. If you haven't seen it, it's about two men with terminal cancer who create a list of things to see and do before they die. The expression kicking the bucket, by the way, dates back to medieval times when condemned prisoners would stand on buckets at the gallows. Anyway, critics ravaged the movie. It was way too schmaltzy for my taste, but it perfectly captured a universal desire to want to see certain places and have certain experiences. And its rapid spread across popular culture around the world proves that we should never underestimate the right corny catchphrase at the right time. There's no definition of what a bucket list experience actually is. So like any hardworking journalist, I just had to make something up. It has to be unique to its place, something you can't do anywhere else. It has to be entirely memorable, something you'll remember for the rest of your life. It has to be realistic and attainable, unlike something like walking on the moon or racing cars with Elon Musk, or something completely fantastical like watching the Maple Leafs win the Stanley Cup. And finally, it has to be a great story that you want to share with your friends and your family. In my case, readers and followers. The Dead Sea is a perfect example, right? On a hot summer day, you can relax, float in the brine, and then you slather this amazing mineral-rich mud on yourself, which they package and sell for a small fortune. So we've got a unique place, a memorable experience, something everyone can do, and it's a great story. This one time I visited the Dead Sea. You can see how it ticks off all the boxes. You know about the Dead Sea. Do you know about Canada's Dead Sea? Saskatchewan's Little Manitou Lake is also a saltwater lake. The Dead Sea is actually a lake where you can relax without any effort, floating in the brine, soak up the beautiful scenery, and then slather yourself in this mineral-rich mud. Unlike the Dead Sea, though, this mud is free. So if you're looking for a wellness fortune, you can just show up there with a truck and just gather as much of it as you like. Canada has many equivalents to global wonders, but we don't beat our chests too much about it. We can be rather arrogant with our modesty. And as ubiquitous as they've become, I like the concept of a bucket list because it addresses one of the more positive endeavors of the human spirit. They help us define and work towards big travel dreams, which can teach us so much about our world and our place within it. Bucket lists are so much more than just holidays and beaches and theme parks. Genealogical travel is a great example. Traveling to discover your roots is particularly enriching, stitching together your personal history in a way you rarely forget. It's why I went to Lithuania, to find the old shtetl where my grandfather was born, to learn more about where I come from, even if it would lead me to mass graves in the forest where my relatives were among millions of victims of the Holocaust. Shockingly, this memorial, this plaque at those mass graves had been vandalized. Lithuania turned out to be one of the saddest and yet most important trips of my career. My book, The Great Global Bucket List, also has chapters about the Apartheid Museum in Johannesburg and my visit to Auschwitz in Poland, which haunts me when I think about it. These are difficult places to visit, absolutely, but they're essential to go to. And this is true whether you're going to historical atrocities or encountering endangered bears or flowing down the Amazon. David Attenborough said it perfectly. No one will protect what they don't care about, and no one will care about what they have never experienced. We have to go to these places, and that's why my book is a bit subversive, because you're thinking, it's all amazing, and then you hit these heavy places because it's so important for everyone to understand what took place and what that experience of visiting is like. Now, you don't need to tell me that the world is changing dramatically. Unfortunately, when it comes to bucket list experiences, it's not so much a case of do it before you die, but before it disappears. The Amazon is being flattened, the Peruvian Amazon included. Ghost coral haunts the Great Barrier Reef. Paradise Pacific Islands are going to be underwater in 50 years. And those polar bears up in Churchill are the most endangered polar bears on Earth. They're starving as the ice is taking longer and longer to freeze on the Hudson Bay. It's all on the table this week in Glasgow, and there's ample evidence to confirm your optimism or your pessimism. We're going to need some luck to turn this around. And luck is a word I'm very well acquainted with. You can't do what I do and tell people. When I tell people what I do, they're always like, "Oh, you're the luckiest. That's so lucky, 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 lucky." But let me tell you a story. Gary Player, one of the all-time golfing greats, was practicing in a bunker at a golf course, and he chips the ball from the bunker onto the green into the hole. And a club member sees this and says, "I'll give you $50 if you can do that again." And Gary Player puts the ball down, chips it onto the green into the hole. And the guy says, $100 if you could do that again. Gary Player puts down a third ball, chips it on the green into the hole. And the guy walks over with the money and says, "You're the luckiest bastard I've ever seen." And Gary Player famously replied, "Funny enough, the harder I practice, the luckier I get." Look, I didn't just get a call one day to host a TV show. Although I had zero TV experience, I thought someone should make a TV show about travel writers. It's a really misunderstood profession. And they're making TV shows about bachelors and bakers and candlestick makers. I mean, really. And then I got curious and I literally typed into Google, "How do you get a TV show?" And I learned how to create and pitch an idea. And then I worked really, really, really hard, went 500 extra miles and got my hard-earned lucky break to create, produce, and co-host the travel show. And millions of people around the world have watched me get lucky with my co-host in 36 countries. I don't think that actually came out right. Anyway, a few years later, I got lucky again when my first book, The Great Canadian Bucket List, became the biggest selling travel book in Canada because I believed that guidebooks needed to be reinvented. We're drowning in information, but we know where to find a pizza and where to stay, but we don't know why we should travel to these places in the first place. So I wrote a book of stories with characters and humor and history and trivia, and needless to say, both my books have done really, really well. Luck and timing are powerful forces that operate beyond our control, but adapting to those forces is not. Professionally, politically, culturally, financially, things are constantly changing. A strategy that works for us one year is obsolete the next. Ambitious plans get smashed by microscopic pathogens. I'm used to giving keynotes on a stage, and here I am looking at a little green dot, hoping that you're out there listening to me and enjoying this and not scrolling puppies on TikTok. I'm a lucky guy, absolutely, but luck doesn't just happen. I'm a firm believer that luck is like respect. It has to be earned. And you earn that luck by finding the opportunities and getting prepared, minding your curiosity, asking questions, persisting when things get tough, and doing the best you can do. I think it's very easy to look at colleagues and competitors and celebrities and think, how come they're doing so well? How come they figured it all out? But we're only looking at the tip of the success iceberg. We only see and we celebrate that top 10% without acknowledging that 90% of an iceberg sits below the water. The hard work, the sacrifice, the disappointment, and the many mistakes we learn from, and the many mistakes we don't. There's one last critical risk management tool I have when I find myself in over my head. Don't panic. Bad things happen when we panic, when we forget to breathe and smile, and when we run into the fire instead of planning how we're going to put it out, especially when you travel. It's hard not to panic when things don't start in the way you expect them to, when things fall apart, when markets crash, when we're all restricted or locked down. It's hard not to panic when you get lost in a South Pacific burial cave, or when someone literally hands you a giant scorpion and says, "Don't worry, it will only sting you if it senses you're afraid." Awesome. Don't panic, don't panic, don't panic. I mean, think about every rotten situation we've all been in, every project or investment that went sideways, every time we were late, every time we missed a deadline, every time the computer crashed. And here we are. We're here, we're getting around, we're doing it. We're dealing with it as it comes. So this is why I don't think I have this enormous amount of confidence that everything's going to work out okay. Chasing positive stories and information, smiling, not panicking, trusting our instinct, feeding our curiosity. I mean, none of this stuff is revolutionary. I'm sure you've all heard it before, but learning its truth in incredible real life situations has had a tremendous impact on my life. In fact, in all my travels, I've never been robbed. I've never been attacked. I've never been seriously injured. I've never been violently ill. Other than petty nuisances, I've never picked up any weird parasites or had my identity stolen or my organs harvested, at least to my knowledge. And this is from someone who wrote a column called Thrill Seeker for years. I mean, a nice Jewish boy from Joburg isn't well equipped to do with this stuff and to do this kind of thing normally. Anyway, like so much before the pandemic, jet set travel was just something we took for granted, perhaps forgetting that cheap airfare and the ease of online booking are pretty recent phenomenons, but now with travel taken away from us, we understand the value that it offers all along, the chance to discover new landscapes and learn about new cultures and reconnect with old histories, the gift of meeting new people and old friends, the prospect of learning so much about the world and ourselves amidst the food and the festivals and the celebrations and the romance. The tourism industry believes we're only going to rebound from this to pre-pandemic levels as late as 2024 or 2025. But when we do, when our pent-up frustration for adventure finally aligns with a booming market and optimism for the post-pandemic future, I think these 20s are going to absolutely roar. And I've got little doubt that I'm going to find you in one of my favorite countries. Well, one of my favorite countries. It really depends on what you're into. Nature, food, culture, history. It also depends on how you want to travel. I once did a Seder night at an incredible 5-star kosher restaurant in Patagonia in Argentina. And I once did Rosh Hashanah with 300 dusty Israeli backpackers on the banks of the Ganges in India. Both experiences were grounded in Yiddishkeit, but both would appeal to vastly different people with vastly different interests. But there are some countries that have everything of everything, and I've revisited them several times. I have no problem recommending them as my top countries. Bolivia, Iceland, South Africa, Brazil, Turkey, Sri Lanka. I'll throw Thailand in there, and most of all, Canada. We live in a country that's blessed with so many bucket list experiences. It took me 3 years to travel to every province and territory just to uncover them. But the highlights of my Canadian bucket list is another talk for another day. As a proud immigrant who happens to make his living traveling around the world in search of unique experiences, I have to mention how fortunate and grateful I am to live in this country. I was floored when I found out that the goods that were confiscated from prisoners in Auschwitz were stored in warehouses that the prisoners nicknamed Canada. Canada. That was the name that they felt was most symbolic of hope and plenty and freedom and opportunity. And so for all the bitching and the complaints we read about in the news, and for all the problems we have as a country, and yeah, we've got a lot of problems, I think everyone should step back every once in a while just to acknowledge and appreciate how good we have it here in one of the world's most progressive democracies and easily one of the planet's most beautiful and spectacular countries. Now, earlier I mentioned the 5 secrets to happiness, including something to do, someone to love, something to look forward to. I mentioned the other 2 now because wherever you go, these are going to be especially pertinent. Limit your choices, lower your expectations. There are going to be so many options ahead. We have a long menu of adventures awaiting us. Whatever you choose to do, commit to it. Try not to freak out about the grass you're not standing on, the choices you didn't make. Believe that you made the best decision that you could. Enjoy it. Find peace knowing that wherever you are is where you're supposed to be. And when you do get to your destination, it's your experience, not a travel writer's, not a TV show's, not some guy you heard speaking on Zoom. It might rain, the traffic might be bad, things might be overpriced, the restaurant might be having a bad day. The bigger your expectation and your sense of entitlement, trust me, the more disappointed you'll be. This is a big lesson that our neighbors down south just can't get their heads around. And trust me, you're never going to run out of things to do. Bucket lists are like whack-a-mole. You tick 3 things off the top and 3 more are guaranteed to pop up at the bottom. Although I think we should stop teaching kids to whack furry mammals and start teaching them to whack a virus instead. COVID has whacked us all pretty hard. Although when I think back to that car accident, that car running me down all those years ago, I have to believe that exciting new opportunities have a very strange way of presenting themselves. Not in my wildest dreams could I have imagined a bucket list travel career waiting for me around the corner, along with a beautiful wife and kids who I've been so fortunate to bring along on so many of my adventures. We don't know what's around the corner, but there is a lot to look forward to. If any of the places I spoke about today intrigue you, you can learn all about them and tons of other amazing experiences in my books. And if I can help spread some much needed inspiration for your own companies, your clients, your colleagues, your friends, your organizations, please get in touch. I'm on a one-man mission to just really make everyone feel empowered to chase their bucket lists and look forward to what comes next. I'd love to hear from you. And if you're looking for an inspired end-of-year corporate gift, I did a deal with my publishers who are offering an amazing bulk discount on my books. Everyone loves them. Get in touch with me and I'll gladly give you more information about that. So once again, it's been an honor to share some stories and images and adventures with you today. It's really just the tip of my iceberg. I'd like to thank the UGA, Mel and Brooke, and also Darren, Joel, and Brad Goldhar, who recommended me for this talk. Thanks so much. And I'm going to turn it back over to Darren for Q&A.
Wow, thank you so much. That was really inspiring. I felt like I've just traveled around the world and back in less than an hour. Thank you so much. I love those pictures. I actually laughed out loud when you told the story about your experience in Papua New Guinea, when you commented, "Buddy, can't we all get along?" I just had that visual of you and this this person dressed the way he did and the language barrier, but it all worked out, thankfully. I mean, I have lots of questions. I wonder if we should maybe open it up to others to ask first. And if not, then I can start asking questions. Actually, I have one off the top of my head. Are you a skier? And if so, what would you recommend as some of the more unique places you've been? I've been fortunate to ski in Canada and around the Rockies in the US as well, but internationally, I'm sure you've had some experiences if you are in fact a skier.
So yeah, when people ask me what's on the top of my bucket list, I didn't rank everything, but pretty much in the top 3 of my Canadian bucket list. I mean, it's a thick book with tons of stuff. Heli skiing, and I actually went heli boarding. I didn't ski back then, and the experience of being on a mountain and over 5 days, like I thought that you'd get one run. I thought that they would give me one run and I'd be like, know what heli skiing is all about. But they laughed at me. They're like, no, it's going to take you days just to get your legs to figure out how to ski in that enormous amount of powder. And by the 3rd day, I still to this I just think of that moment of joy of just like, this is as good as life can be. So the like CMH heli ski lodges are incredible. There's one I just did. I looked at one in Terrace, BC. I mean, just amazing. There's going to be the new all-inclusive, I was telling you earlier, in Charlevoix, Quebec. Club Med are opening up the first all-inclusive ski resort in North America. So this is amazing for kids, right? Because you can go there and all your gear is there. Lessons are included, meals are included, accommodation. You don't have to worry about all the logistics. It's on Le Massif, the mountain. And I think that's going to be fantastic. My favorite ski resort in Canada is Sun Peaks. I think Whistler, I know everyone from the East Coast, like Whistler, but here on the West Coast, we're like, that's where Whistler's big and wonderful for tourists, but Sun Peaks is, and Big White, the powder is amazing and just much smaller, easier to navigate, ski in, ski out, and just easier to do. So those are my favorite resorts.
Yeah, good tips. Thank you. I see in the chat, there's a couple of questions. What makes Bolivia such an interesting destination?
Bolivia is the poorest country in South America, but you mustn't think about that as being like, oh, it's really hard. It's actually quite easy to travel, but it's got the most incredible natural attractions. So the Lake Titicaca, first of all, you go on a catamaran and you go on Lake Titicaca for a couple of days, a luxury catamaran. Oh, it's absolutely gorgeous. The light up there feels like it's been distilled through crystal. It's just an incredible part of the world, and then culturally so unique with the Mayan and the Incan and the Andean culture. Then you go down south to Salar de Uyuni, which is the closest you'll come to being on another planet, the world's largest salt desert. Just the formations, the gemstone, the weird colored lakes, the flamingos, and then this really interesting culture. I've been back 3 times to Bolivia. It always surpasses my expectations, and I try and keep them low. It's just so different. It's just so unlike this homogenous travel that's kind of starting to happen. There's no Starbucks, and I personally love that. I want to go to an expat New Zealander who married a Bolivian who's running a coffee shop and makes you a great latte, as opposed to walking to a Starbucks. So yeah, it's a bit difficult to get to, but to do like Peru and Bolivia and Chile in like a 3-week trip is just incredible.
I mean, the fact that you've been there 3 times is testament to how incredible it must be. Another question, can you suggest any great road trips?
Oh yeah, there's Canada is just made for road trips. I think that mile for mile, there's not a more beautiful drive anywhere in the world than the Icefields Parkway between Banff and Jasper. So, doing a road trip coming from the East Coast, if you were to fly into Vancouver and then take a car to the Rockies and back again, it's just an incredible road trip. The scenery is just spectacular. Before I came to Canada, to BC, I traveled around Scandinavia for a couple of months. And I remember thinking, I've never seen a more beautiful landscape, just like snow-capped mountains and the forests and the lakes and the fjords. And then I got to BC and I was like, this is kind of similar to Norway. Just the drive, so going through the Fraser Canyon and all this kind of stuff is amazing. The East Coast on Newfoundland has an amazing road trip called the Viking Trail down the East Coast. So it's Gross Mourne and Lancer Meadows, and also just spectacular. And a road trip is really about the roads, the stops, the roadside attractions. So those are my two favorite. But to be honest, I love the prairies as well. I think the prairies is an amazing road trip. It's flat and a big sky, but if you turn off the highway and you just walk into those small coffee shops and say hello and smile, you can meet the most interesting people, and they can usually direct you to some really interesting things to see.
There's so many places, domestically and around the world. It'll be interesting to see when the world opens up. I mean, we're starting to open up, but I hear of people relocating for a month, or 2 months. It'll be interesting to see how people merge their travel aspirations with their work and family lives. It's an exciting time in a way, despite the pain that's been inflicted on us because of this pandemic. But I guess the silver lining is that we've learned to navigate and in some ways maybe reprioritize travel as part of that new normal. And with that, we're out of time, unfortunately. I can talk about this with you all day. But Robin, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your knowledge and your passion for travel. We, on behalf of you, Jason, sincerely appreciate it. And thank you everyone for logging on. And with that, we'll close. Thanks and have a good day.
Travel safe, everybody. Thank you.